Welcome. My name is Carmen Bilafi, and I am a research associate for the RISE program. Today, I will be talking to you about the dynamics of learning and using something called the Pedagogical Production Function to model and simulate these learning dynamics, and also to simulate different policies that might or might not improve learning. I will be drawing heavily on the work by Michelle Kaffenberger and Lan Pritchett, as well as others in the RISE program and network. Thank you very much for your research. So first of all, let's take just a very general approach and talk for a few minutes about the dynamics of learning in general. So why do we even need to look at the dynamics of learning? Well, we need to put special emphasis on that because many learning assessments simply cannot accurately capture the dynamics of the learning process in the way that would be helpful to actually combat the learning crisis. So the first element is that cross-section data of a single age and grade is really about outcomes and not about the process of learning. But we know that no matter where and when we assess them, children got to where they are through a process of learning. And we really need to hone in on when children started falling behind. Secondly, assessments also often happen very late in the schooling cycle and often too late to show where and when children start falling behind. We know from research time and again that if we figure out that by grade 10, kids aren't learning, we can't fix that problem by trying to fix grade 9 because learning is cumulative and therefore learning gaps are cumulative. So we need to hone in on when the problem started to occur and kids started falling behind. In order to capture these learning processes better, RISE and others have started using something called learning profiles. And learning profiles, at a very general description, are how much children learn over time in a specific context. And very schematically, this is what it looks like. So on the x-axis, we have time. So this is either age or grade. And then on the y-axis, there is the skills. So basically, the learning profile shows how much learning over time is happening. And RISE has analyzed a plethora of learning profiles from over 50 different countries, over 6 million individuals, different data sources. And there are a few things that have crystallized that whether we want to describe the learning process or model the learning process are just really important pieces of evidence. And so these findings from learning profiles are important for modeling learning as well. This is a really short description and summary of it. And some of it will also be central to other presentations in this panel. So I hope there can be a lively discussion, maybe more in-depth conversation about some of these points. First, learning profiles simply are too flat. So learning is too low in most developing countries. So for children to actually achieve the SDG 4 goals of learning for all. They're simply not learning enough each year they are in school. Secondly, learning varies dramatically, both across and within countries, but even within a single classroom. And one example of this was the MindSpark program that Karthik Muralidharan and others have done in different iterations already now in India. So this was a baseline from Delhi, where they found that by grade 8, children are on average already 4 years behind the curriculum. And by grade 8, there is a massive variation in skill level in a single classroom spanning between 5 and 6 years, which means that many of the kids in grade 8 are still at a level of skill of grades 2 and 3. So they never really mastered foundational skills. Third, learning differences emerge very early. And they are difficult to correct later on because they grow over time. Our colleague Abhijit Singh, for instance, has done analysis of Young Life's data and found that learning differences are already big and significant between children in Vietnam and India by age 8. So much earlier than we would usually anticipate. A fourth factor is that while we know that quality of instruction, of course, matters for learning, What is often underestimated is the alignment between instruction and children's learning levels. So instruction can be really great and really lively, but if there is no connection to where children currently are, they will not be able to connect to what is being taught in the classroom. And so the alignment between these two elements and the interaction between these two parameters is really central. So all of this is a description of what we've figured out from learning profiles, which is this description. And the next step in the research was to say, well, we don't just want to describe what's going on in the learning process, but we want to be able to model different scenarios and simulate different counterfactual policy scenarios also. And this is where this pedagogical production function, or PPF, came into play, which is basically a dynamic simulation of learning profiles. So we can manipulate different elements of this function to then see how the learning profiles would increase or decrease or take a different shape. So let's look at this pedagogical production function in a bit more detail for a few minutes. So as I've said, this pedagogical production function is a model, a formal dynamic model of the learning process with a defined set of parameters that make up this model. And basically the PPF specifies the learning that is gained at different points in an initial student skill distribution. So it is not just about the shape that this PPF itself takes, but it is also about the interaction with the student skill distributions. And what the authors Michelle Kaffenberger and Lan Pritchett have done in their papers is they calibrated their PPF to replicate the PISA-D results of 2018. Let's come for a minute to these different parameters that I mentioned. So we can even see in this graphic here that there are different things that make up this shape of the PPF, and all of those matter and have their own importance. So the first is actually the shape, and we see that this has a trapezoidal shape. Theoretically, a PPF could take any shape. It could be rectangular, it could be triangular, but based on the evidence of the learning profiles that the authors in RISE have gathered, the authors here decided that there is a trapezoidal shape because the learning experience in a classroom isn't the same depending on where children are in the skill distribution, which means that they've decided in their model that kids that are on the higher end of the distribution are actually going to benefit more from one unit of classroom instruction than those at the lower end of the distribution. And that's why we have a trapezoidal shape. The second, which is very much connected to the shape, is the maximum and minimum height, which you can see here and here. And those represent the most and least that is learned by a child while they are still learning something, which means that in the distribution, there are going to be some children that do not learn anything, which can be either because those children are so advanced that they're not gaining anything new from classroom instruction, which is why they would fall outside of the PPF on this end. But, and this is the much more realistic scenario, that a lot of kids are just left behind so much that their skill level just doesn't match to the instruction, and therefore they're so far left behind that they can't actually build any more skill on top of what they have already learned. So you need to be, as a child, you need to be covered by the PPF in order to learn anything. And so you can also fall outside of the PPF on the higher or lower end of the distribution. Then we have a slope, which basically just connects the maximum and minimum height. And this is the difference in learning across the distribution that I already talked about. Then we have the width of the PPF, which is this here. And this is basically the range of student abilities that can learn anything under the PPF. And you can, of course, imagine that this can be very wide or very narrow, which means that children with a wider range of skill distribution or a narrower range of skill distribution will actually benefit from classroom instruction. And this, of course, is an important parameter to think about how we can improve teaching and improve learning. Then two other parameters, and for this I'm using this different picture with the skill distribution because this is where the interaction comes in that I talked about. The first is the center of the PPF. So what is the student's skill level that is the center of the PPF? And here in this picture, the center of the initial distribution is also the center of the PPF. But in many classrooms, we see that actually the instruction is much faster and much farther ahead of where students actually are. And so if basically the PPF moves faster to the right or moves further ahead than the skill distribution, then of course more and more children will in the end not be covered by the PPF anymore on the lower end. So this has to do with the centeredness of the PPF, but also with the last parameter, number 6, with the pace. And the pace is basically the amount that the center of the PPF shifts with each grade level. So of course, if we move from grade 1 to 2, the PPF is going to shift upwards. And of course, students will have learned something, so this will also shift. But it is about the interaction between the two and that they're not completely incongruent, so children will just stop learning. Now, we don't only just want to look at the parameters, but look at what we can do with simulating learning in practice. And Michelle Kaufenberger and Lan Pritchett have used this same PISA-D calibration in their PPF to simulate a range of counterfactual policy scenarios. The first is coming from this problem that countries very often don't estimate how much expanding access would do for learning goals. And so they asked the question, well, how much would currently non-enrolled children gain from additional schooling? And simulated what would happen if we had universal grade 10 completion. So not just within the PISA-D countries, the 30% that complete grade 10, but actually 100% of children would complete grade 10. And what we see is that there is a bit of change at the very low end of the score distribution for PISA-D, but we see that because those children's learning profiles are flat, they won't achieve basic skills even with additional years of schooling. So if we wanted to get to a higher altitude, going up very, very flat flights of stairs will just take us a very long time to reach a certain altitude. And this is exactly the same issue that we see here with just adding on years of schooling when kids aren't actually benefiting so much from additional years of schooling on learning. And secondly, we can ask, well, what would that do for reaching the SDG learning goals? And remember that the SDG learning goals themselves are a measure of minimum proficiency, so in themselves a low bar to measure learning. But they only start at around 400 on the PISA scale. So we see that this universal grade 10 completion would have no impact on the SDG learning goals. Kaufenberger and Pritchett then also simulate other adjustments to the PPF, namely raising the height of the PPF, which means that children will have a higher learning gain per year. So this has to do with improving quality of instruction. The second scenario they simulate is expanding the range of instruction, which means the width of the PPF is getting wider. So it's not just a narrow set of skill distribution that will benefit, but a wider one. And the third is basically about this interaction between children's learning levels and instruction that I talked about. So if we align the centeredness and the pace of the PPF with the actual skill distribution, what would happen? And Kaufenberger and Pritchett then put this into context and in comparison of equivalent years of learning gained. And what we can see is that universal grade 10 completion really doesn't do much, but improving instruction, so the height of the PPF, and slowing down the curricular pace to align with students' learning levels both does a lot, and so does expanding the width of the PPF also does a little bit with regards to learning gained. A different example that in the end I now quickly want to highlight is what we also did were different simulations of long-term learning losses that could accumulate because of the COVID-19 school closures in 2020. And here we simulate that the initial learning loss would be 1/3 of a year, but this can be adapted. And then we simulated 3 scenarios. One where no mitigation is happening. One where when children come back to school, in the year they come back, they will have some short-term remediation to catch up. And one where this remediation happens, but we will have a long-term reorientation of the curriculum to match with children's learning levels. And these numbers that you see here is the number of children that are in school but are not learning. So basically those children that will have fallen outside of the lower end of the PPF. And while we see here for those 2 scenarios that 3 out of 4 or even 4 out of 5 children really are in school and learning nothing, we could push this down through with remediation plus reorientation of the curriculum to only 13%. And so this really highlights the importance of curricular reorientation, because this really shows to have the biggest effects on long-term learning. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to your questions and your feedback, and goodbye for now.